Hi, Joe. Thanks for coming to this interview today.
Of
So,
course,
as
no
you
problem.
know, just gonna be asking some questions about your child's media use and how that's affecting them, um, and basically just your overall experience with that.
Mhm.
So, to start, can you just describe a typical day in terms of your child's media use, like how much time they spend on media and the various forms of media that they spend their time playing on or interacting with?
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Joseph. Um, I give permission to do all that. Um, so I guess I should start with saying I have a 6-year-old daughter. Some of the media usage that she has is Roblox. Um, there's YouTube Kids, and then at one point there was YouTube. And then because it was like a split household situation, um, there is another party at play, so they also have like TikTok over there, and I know that was like a discussion. So,
So,
um,
like, with those different types of media, like, what would you say that she spends the most time on?
definitely Roblox, and then also like other ads or games that have like ads with different
Uh-huh.
like pop-ups and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so she'll spend most of her time on Roblox. Next most would be YouTube.
YouTube.
Yeah, and that's just like, if anything, like, YouTube's mostly like TikTok because it just has like a shorts
Right.
dedicated area,
So she
and
would
you
just
could
be
just
scrolling.
through scrolling. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just scroll nonstop.
So, was there any forms of media that maybe she wasn't exposed to or interacted with inside the house? Like, did she interact with any types of media at school? Like, I know a lot of schools have their kids learning with tablets, or like during COVID, they were learning over the computer.
Yes, so in class they also have like screen time, and I know at school they have their own iPads and laptops.
Uh-huh.
So that's pretty cool for them to be learning to type at first grade level. Um, but it's also one of those things where it's like at such a young age now you're baby stepping that access into the internet, which is
Yeah. And she was only 6, and she was kind of like really immersed in it already.
yeah, and curiosity is just a question away with the internet. So
Right. Okay, so for those two you mentioned, Roblox and YouTube, as a parent, did you have any concerns or any like really glaring observations that you saw, like any effects that you saw?
well, besides pop-up ads that were like I would say targeted towards demographics of like 16 and up.
Mhm.
So there are things like I don't know, stuff like ads that will pop up that would be like borderline sexual harassment, where like a guy just kind of like comes up and like it's all animated, cartoony, but like is like orientated towards like focusing on women and stuff like that. So it was like one of those like, what is showing like on a 4-year-old's tablet at this time,
And that was like on YouTube and stuff?
Yeah, it would show up in between like YouTube Shorts.
Oh, okay.
Like in the scrolling, it would just be popping up on ads, or even on video games, and like it would just pop up on ads, like just weird things like that. It would be like the plumber came over or something, like choose this, and it's like just random options. It's like what dude, this is like weird, and you would wonder like why is that the target? Because all information put in is like this is a 4 or 5-year-old child.
Right.
Why is
So
that
that
the
was
targeted ad?
That was the
Yeah.
algorithm even generating.
Yeah. So it was one of those like that's a little bizarre. And that's besides that as a huge red flag. And once we can figure out like ad blockers and actually just kind of keeping her off of that app, then it was her usage on Roblox. Then the frustration that came with it because kids just rage quit, and there is games on Roblox because I wasn't familiar. I wasn't really like focused on the specific like games at the time, but there's other forms of games on one platform.
Right.
And so, like hide and seek was one of them, or like tightrope was one of them. So she would get super upset when she would fail, and it was one of those like, oh, now we have to regulate emotions and stuff like that. And it was like, okay, you can't have this because you can't control your emotions.
Right.
You're not regulating yourself to a point to where you can handle the loss.
Right.
And so that was like one of those issues. It was like, okay, maybe you're not emotionally mature enough for this device. And then going forward, 5 years old, it was like, okay, now you can play it. We're all playing Mario Kart together. You're exhibiting that still rage quit type form and everything like that. And I was like, but understand, you can pause, take a moment. It's alright, it's just a game. She learned to overcome that, and it was like, alright, that's a different battle. But with Roblox, it wasn't just the rage that she would get with like the loss. It was also the rapid screen or whatever it was. She started to develop tics, like getting like tremors. She was making noises, popping sounds with her mouth, like snorting noises, and like moving her hand in the air and like patterns, making like little finger motions. And it was like we wanted to start testing for autism and stuff like that. And we went maybe 5-6 months of wondering what's going on before we started to do a process of elimination and like find out like what was happening essentially. And we kind of narrowed it down to something called like pandas. And it was her screen time started tremors and tics, and it was like it was apparent. And so we got her like these yellow light or blue light blocking glasses, and she would wear those when she needed to at school, and they said it helped, and she wasn't acting out or wasn't and doing stuff like that. So that was like a big step when it was like screen time at school, and at home as well. We just totally stopped TV. We would watch like Disney Plus every day. We just come home and just be like, all right, cool, Disney Plus, and that would be like playing on the background, and it was just nonstop screen. So we had to adjust essentially.
Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy that it was like blue light that was like a big responsibility in like causing those tics.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would think it was something else, like just like the type of media that they're looking at, the type of game that they're playing.
Well, they also said it was the rapid transition of images, because it would go between cutscenes, right? So like I don't know now, but like I guess TikToks are orientated towards like short attention spans, right? So it's just constant flash of like what's next, and so it's like popping in different screens, and you have maybe quarter 8-second intervals between images popping up on the screen. So it's almost seizure inducing, and people with like epileptic backgrounds definitely can't handle stuff like that. So for a young age or like a young brain that's developing, maybe one that's already experiencing too much stimuli, that's an overload. And so it was showing in their physical attributes, and that's what we learned. It was basically overloading their brain, and the result was physically they were moving or making noises.
And did those tics, was it something that like your child themselves noticed, and like did it affect them mentally at least? Like,
yeah, I would say definitely with time, just because at first we weren't understanding of the situation. So it was one of those like, hey, why are you doing that? It was like, oh, I don't know. I wanted to.
right.
And so that was like that at first. And we're like, okay, but you recognize you're doing that, right? Do you know why? And it was like, well, no, I just feel like I do,
Okay.
And it was like, I don't want to, but I do.
Right.
And then it became a self-recognition, and it built into something, and then it became a shame thing. And it was like, okay, maybe our approach to this, because at that point in time, we started recognizing the pandas, and then we were looking at other parents that had has similar instances, and then the whole soft parenting approach.
Right.
Like, how do you transition into allowing the kid to recognize and then start building for their own character? And so we had to see, the expressions on her face of like getting frustrated, recognizing that she is doing these things, and it would be in the car. Like she had this snorting pig noise that was reoccurring. She just like she had phlegm in the back of her throat, and we thought, well, maybe she has allergies, maybe she's allergic to the cat. Maybe we went through everything, saw allergists, did X-rays on her skull, even everything, just to see her nasal cavity, all of it, and it was 100% psychological.
Wow.
So the correlation at the time was just screen usage, and when we stopped it, we noticed, because it was like, oh, she didn't have her iPad today. We were at Disneyland the entire day. 5 hours into Disneyland, none of those things were showing, right? But it's a different type of stimuli. So when we're going on Alice in Wonderland towards the end of the day, and there's a whole bunch of flashing things going on, and there's neon lights and all that stuff is going on, suddenly it happened, and we never even mentioned it. So it wasn't like one of those placebos and then it was revealed into her. It was like one of those like, crap, we almost went the entire day without noticing it.
Yeah.
And then it was, okay, now it's the stimuli again. So it was a recognition, and it took a long time to recognize those patterns.
Right.
But
how long did it take you guys to recognize?
I would say over the course of like 9-10 months. And it was like, realistically, it probably started from her initial screen time, which was early twos.
Early twos.
Yeah. So that was one of those things. It was just, okay, cool. You're gonna learn ABCs on YouTube.
Right.
And that was just one of those like go-tos for everybody.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
And she's pandemic baby, or at least like her toddler ages were like smack middle of pandemic. So you don't get education elsewhere. It's just like,
yeah, that's interesting, because it's, we're trying to understand how media is affecting children and trying to hopefully mitigate its effects, like negative effects. And we don't really consider, it's like, well, are the ways we're using media to educate our children, are those like just playing into all the negatives that come from it? Like, is it better just to maybe scrap the device, in the earlier stages, and just stick to the old school whiteboard, right, to learn your ABCs and
yeah,
do lessons on?
I would definitely say for my second child, that is the approach. Is we're gonna not have screen time in the early stages. I think it's so crucial to have a rooted self-awareness of the world around you and the people around you to become more emotionally developed. Because I'm recognizing now, like with our first daughter, those beginning years are crucial for emotional development, and when frustration of instant gratification is thrown into the mix, the personality is now around instant gratification. The personality is now around frustration and give me now.
Right.
And so it became problematic. And so I think,
yeah, you mentioned that she was struggling to manage her own emotions.
Yeah, and it's
based off that device.
Yeah, and it just became a whole center of gravity.
Right.
It was just
yeah. Everything about her was revolving around this device.
Being able to use it, being around it, having it. Holy cow, it's on 12%. Like, all of it. It is just the panic that comes with having that. And it was like, okay, this is a little too much, because I think sometimes, like, man, I want to get separation from a device or from screen time and from all that. And I can't imagine being locked in like that, or just tied to it. Yeah, just completely tied to it. And so we had to regulate that. And I think definitely moving forward, and I think with other parents, you should have a very regulated, limited, and also overviewing approach to how you give these devices and how they're used or allowed the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so what really stuck out to me there, when we're looking at how to kind of navigate these media effects, and you mentioned that as parents you kind of had to take a step back and really start to analyze how yourselves are approaching the issue because it became like a source of frustration or anger, like embarrassment for your child. And
Yeah. Well,
I think we'll touch on that a little bit later, but yeah, I definitely want to hear more about how you guys maybe started to adopt certain mindsets or approaches. But going forward, um, how did you guys decide the types of media content that were appropriate for your child? Like, were there any things that were just strictly off limits? And if so, what were those things? And how did you guys go about enforcing that?
Well, first we have an Apple product.
Uh-huh.
So with Apple product, there comes certain parental controls. So we disabled
a lot of the things that were not her age, and disabled apps that weren't suggested on that age on the App Store. We prevented her from being able to like download games without making so you can't just download anything. You can't just delete anything. It was one of those like you had strict parental blocks, and then we even went down to like having 15-minute per app screen time. So like each app had maximum 15 minutes, and you had to put in a password every time.
To allow another 15.
Allow it, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Or to take off the limit.
And so with downloading the apps, was that just like as simple as you guys had
The password and like the Face ID to download the app.
or it was biometrics at one point, and we had to
take that off because biometrics was again put onto her stuff, and it was one of those things where her grandpa allowed her to have her thumbprint on there, and so she was now making purchases on Roblox for $60 and doing things like completely outrageous with the power of having untapped.
Yeah, so you guys didn't even just have to worry about what you're doing, you had to worry about what their
Grandparents.
Yeah, it was everywhere. Yeah.
If she begs them to,
Uh-huh.
right?
No, totally. She was a money fiend. It was one of those things where it's like, because everything is just a tap away. Oh, Amazon's coming. Just get it on Amazon. Like, that is just a huge thing. I would say is another form of media is the ability to just summon something out of nothing, and just tap it away. And so it's like that is a huge thing. And I think that in the consciousness of a child, a tap means I can have a new backpack, a new lunchbox, a new Orbeez, whatever
So that might be
plushies.
just like buying their currency or their game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like that.
It is
It's another game
100%.
to them.
Because there is no physical value, even though she has a piggy bank, even though we try to assemble the value of currency in her mind. It was like, this is a quarter, this is 25 of these,
Right.
And so you try to implement it, but having that instant gratification totally wipes it away at the end of the day. And so Amazon was a huge oversight we didn't even realize with media, and it came down to her value of money. Got to the point to where at school she had a friend who was, monetarily equipped and got stickers out of like honor system at school. So she got free stickers, and Alani was sent to school with $5 because it was like a book fair time. So they were giving snacks and all that stuff. She bought the free stickers for $5. And it was one of those like, obviously you're not supposed to make purchases at school. Obviously, so the risk to reward, but I guess the underlying lesson is that it was just the instant gratification thing and not the oversight of what are the consequences, or at least is this even a fair deal? Is this a good trade?
Right.
Type thing. And so
It's the way they thought about it.
yeah, the approach of life is just entirely different. Totally different.
Okay, so as far as behavior goes, you mentioned that like she just started to
Developed tics. She became a source of frustration. Started to think about things a little bit differently than the real world. But do you think that her media use, whether it was Roblox, YouTube, or any other form, did they have any other effects, maybe smaller effects on her behavior that you noticed? Like, could you think of any specific examples where you're like, you know what, she did that because of that damn device or something like that? Like, or she's thinking like that because of that.
Oh yeah, honestly, it was just the exposure. There was times where she was watching people play
with toys, right? And how they played with the toys was orientating a different aspect of life, right? You're now divorcing Barbies. You're now,
Okay.
running people over with cars, right? So there's different things with that, and you're introducing prospects of reality into a child that were never introduced, or at least in this instance weren't. And so it's now concepts of other people's realities that aren't theirs, or at least a projection. Come to find out, we're watching these things, just overviewing, or we hear it in the car from the front seat, and we're listening just quietly, and it's not even children playing with these toys. It's adults projecting through children's toys
Right.
and having children play with them and telling them how to play.
Okay.
And it was one of those like, hold on.
So they're learning.
Yeah.
It's like they're learning how to play from someone that's not.
Yeah, and it was like, why are these children being subjected to that? One, right? Like, why is that? Shut that page down. Shut that site down. Like, that's borderline child abuse.
Right.
And then going further, why is that content going and being out for everybody? So it was just kind of one of those like, man, what? That was a reality check. I didn't know that was on YouTube.
Right.
And then you kind of find out that YouTube doesn't really block anything. There isn't any content control. Sure, there is certain things that are triggered and taken down and flagged for like 18 and above.
Right.
But
But it
there's,
kind of like,
yeah,
there's
it
plenty of videos
varies.
that they kind of like get
Slip
pushed
under,
on
yeah.
a drug and could be
Mhm.
disguised as something else,
Mhm.
like whether it's like a thumbnail or a
Yeah.
title.
No, there is, I mean, I don't want to go into like much detail, but I would say there was times where we were listening to something in the background, like, what's going on? And Alani's asleep, but it's just playing in the background. And it was a full birthing video just on YouTube. It was like, that was full explicit, nothing, and it was projected as an educational video. So it was like, because she's a child, anything in the educational topic is now allowed.
Right. Kind of gets.
Yeah, and you could just put anything in education, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So inappropriate content seems like, besides the other aspects or your concerns, that's like a major glaring issue.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Hard to manage, right? Because at that point, it's not even up to the steps that you take. It's like, what is the app itself? What is YouTube allowing?
absolutely.
Like they're just letting things slip through. That's a problem. Okay, so you mentioned like her interaction with media and kind of her shift or change in perception of reality. Like you mentioned, like you're seeing people like getting run over with cars or stuff like that. Do you feel like that in some ways desensitized her?
Absolutely.
And like maybe perhaps like made her behave a little bit more aggressively with other children, or maybe not just
Competitively and a little more aggressively, it put a different sense of self, as well as I would say like an underlying dark humor,
Mhm.
because I think she was introduced to that stuff maybe by the age of 3, young age, right?
Right.
And then
Going over to cousins' houses and they're playing GTA and all that. So exposed to stuff like that, and when I'm not around to regulate, and so I can't always be, overseeing the exposure, and so having that there, and then she's 4 years old, we're watching Bambi for the first time, and it comes down to like that heartbreaking scene when he loses his mom, and she just is like cold face and just goes, shoot a shot. Just like it was nothing. Yeah, not a shock, like just cold, just desensitized. And I just remember thinking like, man, I wept.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, something like that still
Makes you cry like when you're an adult.
yeah, so
To see a little child just like go cold.
Marley and Me or Hachi or something like that, like you just have zero reaction to it. It's like,
Right.
wow, okay. I think it's just the detachment from emotion to screen.
Kind of like disconnected her from maybe feelings of empathy
Yeah.
towards other. Did you see that manifest like physically? Like did she ever like act violently towards other children where you thought, maybe this is because she's looking at something on media or watching her cousins or whatever play GTA or something? Like,
I wouldn't say so much on the violent scale because she is more timid, reserved. She's smaller
okay,
than most kids her size.
So she is more on the like reserve scale. But I do know at the other party's household or parents' household, that there are a lot of boys, so that she just has to kind of fend for themselves. But that was an issue too because of those kids' exposures and having non-regulated exposure, right? Like we have a pretty, I would say, decent airtight system because we learned to have it, right? But at other households, it's not the same, and so because of that, they attribute violence, and so she does come back with bruises, or she does come back, a little scratched up. And she says, "Oh, we were just in the pool swimming." You get a little violent in the pool, so.
You can't really control like her taking her friend's device, and especially since
since everyone has it, right? If she goes to school, she could easily get her friend's phone and start consuming whatever they consume.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's definitely a problem. So, to kind of shift away from the negatives,
Okay.
that we're talking about, do you think that anything about your child's media use was a positive, like as far as education or even behavioral, right? Any positives that came out of anything about their media use?
Yeah, I think with anything there is a silver lining. There is a positive and a negative. Once we got to understanding, once we got to regulating, once we got to, I guess just better equipping ourselves with the knowledge.
We were able to see what worked and what didn't, right? So we went from being on Cocomelon, which is completely rapid changing cutscenes,
Right.
like Tom and Jerry and stuff like that, to doing something with more long scenes like Elmo's Playtime, right? Like that had a huge difference in her attention span, in her everything. At first, it was a frustration because she didn't want to sit and watch, one long scene.
Right.
So it was kind of like a learning into it. But once she developed interest and stuff like that, it was one of those, oh, okay, now she's actually learning things compared to just wanting to watch something.
Okay. So some educational
hmm
benefit.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot more once we started using the tools in the proper way.
Right.
Because just having untapped access is definitely not a way to sharpen any tool. Right, that's just kind of just going haywire. But having a more focused line, following a specific one, or at least putting on a playlist and having the device on airplane mode and having only a downloaded playlist, that's what we found out to be best key. Was like, okay, we're gonna have a structure. First, you're gonna do your math, then you're gonna go to your structure of language. We're throwing in Spanish now, So we're doing different languages like that, and also like different learning approaches and songs and forms of learning. And that was a better approach to YouTube, or at least YouTube Kids. And
Yeah, so it's good that you say that because like now we're at a point in time where media and
All these devices, it's like a absolute reality of everyone's life, and
Inevitable.
it's inevitable, right? Inevitable for any kid. So it's really not about like limiting access or, it's really not about limiting access or just taking it away completely. But the real benefit comes from, as parents or as educators, learning how to work with it and
Knowing how
use
to
it as
use it.
just don't, right? Just don't let it go all crazy, but learn about it, right? Educate yourselves on it so that you could maybe use it to educate your child.
See what works for your child as well.
Okay. So going back to what we were talking about earlier with the tics and some of the behavioral effects that you saw, like that must have been pretty emotional for you guys, or hard to
Yeah,
maybe talk about or even recognize, because it's like you don't want to see your kid struggling with this, right?
Yeah,
Probably,
absolutely.
yeah. So, and you even mentioned like when you would bring it up, she might get frustrated, might make her feel embarrassed. So, as parents, did you guys maybe start to adopt certain mentalities or adopt certain strategies to maybe navigate um, your approach to that situation? Because most parents might, like you said in the beginning, you might just like kind of call it out or call into recognition or existence. And just by doing that, you might make her frustrated. You're not really helping the issue. So, was there any type of like learning or like self development that you guys had to do to approach that issue?
Yeah, actually, I feel like we almost touched base with every form of recognition that there was, even realizing that some were unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, it was a self recognition and like a doubt, especially like on her mother's behalf. It was one of those like, why? Like, what is going on? Like, something's happening, and we were looking into food sources. We did a whole journal on her diet, regulated gluten, regulated sugar, regulated coloring, all of it. We were trying to figure out what is affecting her brain, and what is this change, because we had this happy little 2-3 year old, and overnight almost it just felt like we had someone else, and it was almost heartbreaking. It was completely just one of those like, wow, we have a different kid.
Right.
And we have to adapt now to something different. Why is she having these hand motions? Why is she having these snorting noises or mouth poppings or repetitive noises or just exhibiting strange behaviors? And we had to at least recognize and understand within ourselves we can't get frustrated at her
Right.
when we're frustrated at the situation, because she's probably just as frustrated at the situation. And so overcoming that, it was one of those like, hey, like let me pull you aside, mom. Let me talk to you, and let me say like, hey, I think together, like let's not exhibit our frustrations in front of her. Let's be on like the more mellow approach, only observing, and just be like, hey, do you still want to do that or no? Are you feeling okay? Like, you feeling better now? All right, let's move on. And so we had to have more of that mellow approach to allowing her to recognize her behaviors. And because we did, at first it was one of those like, hey, why are you doing that? And it was like, I don't know, so yeah, and that wasn't working. So we went to, do you want to be doing that? And it was, I don't really want to be doing that. And it developed into a more shame or hurt approach to realizing when she was doing it, and it wasn't doing anything good for her identity. So we had to change it again and kind of switch it up and be like, hey, we don't have to do it, like, come here, like, hold me, like, look in my eyes, see, like, we're okay, right? Like, we don't have to be doing that. And you're still doing it, it's okay. Like, dude, we're good now. Like, take a breath, breathe, and we had like more of a meditation approach to life. It became more of a centering focus of time and place, where even when we're in public, it was like, all right, cool, let's go find a bench, we'll sit down, we're in the mall, like, let's just sit down and breathe, realize, what are you doing this,
Right.
and you don't have to, and getting a better sense of self, being more in control of your actions, and realizing what you're doing doesn't have to affect how you do it, or what you're thinking doesn't affect what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of went from just telling her not to do it to then working with her to help her understand maybe why she's doing it and understand
The feelings that she's having, because as a young kid, especially if you're exposed to all types of media, you already don't really have a good handle on what you're feeling or how to describe it. So
What you're knowing or learning.
yeah, so it just became, you kind of had to like take her away from the situation, like ask her questions that maybe weren't like so suggestive of your frustration, and just kind of work with her as a young kid, which must have been hard to recognize what she's doing and how she could change it.
And we almost went like a cold turkey approach, essentially, and just just stopped media usage, stopped screen time, stopped everything. Went like reading in times where we would be otherwise,
Right. Okay.
and doing other things like just outside activities. We made pottery, we planted, we were doing more physical, and I guess just laborious
Right.
tasks, motion. I mean, what's
That are like
kinetic?
right.
You know, the
Kind of like outside and touching
yeah,
grass
yeah,
and
tactile
using our hands. Yeah.
approach to learning.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
so we were doing various tasks with that for, I would say, close to a year
before we started to tiptoe back into the approach. And it was like I said, or how you had said, inevitable, because being in first grade, it was, you had to sign the waiver as parents. You got your kids taking a laptop and an iPad home.
Yeah.
And you're now responsible for this device. And it was like, well, we didn't say she was allowed to use it at school, but you already were. Now you're asking for us to sign it to have it home. We were like, okay, you kind of blindsided us because we have this policy at home, but now we have to work with it and tiptoe it back into life. And then it was all right, now we're watching movies again, now we're doing this, and it's regulating, so, you know.
Right. So you guys kind of had to.
Take it away completely and then kind of rebuild back into it
Yeah.
with a more focused approach.
Yeah, no, it was built from ground up, foundation, and we realized that even with
That cold turkey approach, it was hard to even navigate up from down, you know, because in that instance it was like you're not seeing any progress for months on end.
Right.
And that was a huge part, was the amount of time it takes to rewire a brain is nothing in comparison the amount of time it takes to wire a brain, right? Because like you can learn a habit in 7 days, right? But you can't break that habit, you know, as easily as you could within like some 7 years or something, you know.
Okay. So we kind of
Talked about what you guys were doing and your role in it, but you know, we're also talking about other things like their media use at school and the other families that they're around. So, do you feel like as parents, parents are solely responsible for their child's media use and the effects? Like, do you think it's fair to say that parents should bear all the burden as far as media use, or do you think that schools, after school programs, other types of programs for kids could be doing a better job, kind of helping and working with parents to manage the media? Like, I don't know if in your experience with her and her school, did you guys ever talk to them about her media use? Did they ever work with you, or was it that kind of like a one-sided thing?
No, so she's gone to 3 schools because of her age. She went to like a pre-school,
Mhm.
and then at her age at the time, it was like she was too old to continue there.
So we took her to an elementary school, and then we found another one closer to her house. And then since then, it's been like that's the one we stuck at.
Okay.
But the transition between every school for every school grade year was, you know, an adaptment or like an adaptation, because we had to learn the policies, right? Her very first school, there was nothing. I mean, there was no iPads. It was just you paint at school every day. And then then you go to the next one, and it was like, okay, yeah, they do have this at school, and we have a projector, and we you know, we go through videos and learning different things like that. They go around and they listen to audio tapes while they read a book or flip through the pages, and so it was different forms of media, right? And then it went into first grade, and they're just having access to the internet. They're doing math games on math websites, learning how to use the websites, learning how to type, learning different things like that, where it was one of those like, where was the diving board and why are we now in the deep end? You know, kind of like, so we had to at least ask, okay, what are you guys doing at the school, and how are we going? And because she's already doing a research project. I mean, I don't remember doing a research project in first grade, so we're learning about hummingbirds. So that's
Yeah. So was there anything that the school was doing, or was there anything
That you had to maybe ask, like, hey, please don't do this, or can you guys maybe adopt an approach that we're using in our house?
Well, I know that the school themselves had to stricken or at least tighten down their policies because um, it goes to sixth grade, and obviously like the fourth to sixth graders are now having access on their phones to TikTok and things like that. So they were performing some of these challenges
Right.
and performing some of these things, or at least trying to do it in school, or like doing it after school and filming it. And because of that, a lot of kids got in trouble, and they had like a lockdown policy. So now there's absolutely no devices allowed at the school. There's personal devices, and when they are, they have to be checked in and to and from.
Okay.
And so that was one of the things that we had to go through. I think at the beginning of the school year was issues from the previous year carried over, and they were like, all right, we're not allowing this going forward, and that was like a stepping stone. And so that was like one of those like, okay, cool, comfortable things. But then to even realize like, oh man, we have a first grader and she's in the same playground as some of the kids that are exposed to something with
Right.
5-year differences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It was kind of just working with them and
yeah.
always kind of knowing what they're doing,
Uh-huh.
so maybe you guys could adopt, or adapt.
At least feel more at ease,
Yeah.
knowing what's going down, or at least what's allowed and what isn't.
Might help you kind of make sense of like
Mhm.
certain behavioral changes. Or,
Mhm. Yeah. Or another thing was when we first started going to the school, it came up in our suggestions on Instagram. Actually, it just was popping up like, okay, so and so elementary school. I don't want to give it information, but their elementary school had an Instagram, and we see that there's like 5 or 6 photos of our child on there. And we're like, where was that permission slip?
Yeah.
Because we didn't sign that,
Right.
And so in a non-confrontational way, we had to have a conversation with the principal saying,
Right.
who was in charge of the Instagram? Okay, what goes on there? Not saying that take them down or anything like that, but it would have been nice to at least know going forward, or at least in the beginning of the school year, hey, we do have a page. Hey, we do this. Because I don't know who follows you. You're public. I followed you, and it was
Right.
that quick. It's having access to children in any form should only be through the parents, right? And that was, a discussion that I had to have with the principal.
So you guys kind of have to. You think parents should really work to like communicate their
On
own.
boundaries with the school.
Yeah.
Maybe like in this instance you kind of just found out about it abruptly, but
Mhm.
maybe like in the future or for other parents, do you think that should be like a really focused topic of conversation, like when the kid just starts attending? Like, do you think that discussing their media use and your boundaries should be like at the forefront of like your child starting to attend, right? Because you don't want to have to like this time you found out about it. It wasn't a big deal, but you kind of maybe felt like they overstepped or they disrespected you in some ways by not asking you. So
Yeah. You definitely feel that way. I would say for most parents, you don't know what you don't know. And so you have to always approach, especially if it's your first time being a parent or if you first go through it, you're figuring out new things every day, you're learning every day. What works and what doesn't, or at least policy wise.
Right.
Who you bring around, are they okay? Are they not, right? Who do you leave your child with for 8 hours a day?
Right.
One of those things. So I think it has to be a middle ground because you don't know necessarily what to ask, because there is a lot to ask if you have the ground for just taking questions. I think it also should be brought forth with, hey, or at the school, at least saying, we do have Instagram, we do have Facebook, or we do this. These are our fundraiser dates. These are our staff members. Have a meet and greet, have an open house, have as many of those as you can to make parents feel comfortable, even if it is a semi-large school. be accommodating in the matter, and be attentive with who comes in and out, right? Just your center of focus should definitely be as a priority with keeping the children safe,
Right.
not only to what they're exposed to, but how they're handled in
Okay.
situations.
Okay, cool. So to kind of close things off, what we talked about. So most research will show that or suggest that anything above like a 2 to 3 hour time limit per day on media is like kind of the upper limit of what children should be exposed to, especially in early years or early teens. As parents and after experiencing this stuff, would you agree with that? Do you think that it should be less, or do you think that in your own like house it was more?
Yeah, in our own personal household, I would definitely say it went from a unregulated approach, what could have been 12 hours a day, right? Something ridiculous to
Cold turkey to now what is now introduced back into maybe 45 to an hour a day. So 2 hours I would say is extreme on the sense of it at once, maybe pace it out, because 2 hours throughout a 16-hour waking period or 13-hour waking period, that's not too horrible. If you space it out 15 minutes on the car ride, 30 minutes on the right, or way back, we're shopping, or you throw it in there somehow to put your kid at ease, or at least give yourself the ability to complete a task, because I feel like parents can have that. They do push off a device to allow their own peace of mind, and I think you shouldn't. But
Okay.
having that regulation
it
with
just
time,
kind of comes down to
that
your own personal
allowance, of time and everything.
Okay. Well, thanks for letting me interview you.
Yeah, of course.